The silence wasn't silence at all, it was a verdict, and the moment Charles Spencer said no, the entire illusion cracked wide open. Not whispered, not negotiated, just shut down. A single refusal that hit harder than any public statement ever could, because this wasn't just about a deal collapsing, it was about a line being drawn around Diana's memory, and who gets to touch it. And suddenly, the question wasn't what happened, it was why now, and what exactly did he see coming that made him slam that door so fast, so completely, so publicly, without saying a single word. Because this isn't just any man quietly declining an offer. This is Charles Spencer, the man who disappeared into silence for decades after one of the most explosive speeches ever delivered in Westminster Abbey. September 6, 1997, 2 billion people watching. A brother standing there holding himself together while promising something that now feels almost prophetic. He promised Diana's sons would be protected from the very system that had broken her. He promised the Spencers would never let history repeat itself. And then he vanished. No interviews, no tell-alls, no cracks in the vault, just silence. Controlled, intentional, almost eerie. And that silence became power. Because while the world kept consuming Diana, her face, on magazines, documentaries, endless retellings, Charles Spencer did something no one else managed to do. He kept a part of her untouched, locked away. Untouched diaries, private home videos, the version of Diana no camera ever truly captured. And every single time someone tried to get access, the answer was the same. No, always no. Publishers, streaming giants, huge money. Carefully crafted pitches designed to sound respectful, even noble. The world deserves to know her. But Charles Spencer never confused desire with entitlement. He understood something most people didn't want to admit. The world wanting Diana is not the same as the world having a right to her. So when that proposal arrived, it wasn't just another offer. It was different, bigger, riskier, and here's where things start to feel uncomfortable. Because rewind back to May 2018. The wedding, the spectacle. The moment Meghan Markle stepped out wearing Diana's aquamarine ring, it looked like tribute. It felt like tribute. A beautiful gesture, emotional, almost symbolic. But then it didn't stop. The butterfly earrings, the Cartier watch, the bracelets. One by one, pieces of Diana's past started appearing again. Always at the biggest moments. Always where the cameras couldn't miss them. Now pause right there, because here's the question no one wants to sit with for too long. When does tribute become pattern? And when does pattern become something else entirely? Once is emotional, twice is coincidence. But every time perfectly aligned with maximum exposure, that starts to look like strategy. And Charles Spencer wasn't watching casually, he was tracking it. Every frame, every appearance. Because to him, those weren't accessories, they were fragments of Diana herself. And they were being placed into a narrative he had no control over. Then came March 2021, the Oprah interview. And this is where the parallels became impossible to ignore. The setup felt familiar, almost too familiar. One woman, one interviewer, a story of isolation, of being silenced, of a system that wouldn't listen. If you knew Diana's 1995 Panorama interview, the resemblance hit immediately. The structure, the tone, the emotional rhythm, it all echoed. But there was one difference, and it changes everything. Diana gave her interview while she was still trapped inside that system. No exit, no safety net, no empire waiting on the other side. It was raw, desperate, real, the 2021 version, filmed in California. After the exit, with production already in motion, with the brand already forming. One was survival, the other felt like something else. And for Charles Spencer, that distinction wasn't small, it was everything. Because there's a truth buried underneath all of this that most people don't talk about. He carries something heavy, something personal. It was Charles Spencer who unknowingly helped open the door to Diana's Panorama interview. He believed the documents, the fake bank statements, the lies that convinced him his sister was surrounded by betrayal. He thought he was protecting her. Instead, he led her into one of the most devastating media moments of her life. And he's been living with that ever since. So when he saw echoes of that same structure playing out again decades later, do you really think he was going to stay silent this time? That's the part that changes how you see everything that followed. Because this wasn't just about a documentary proposal. This wasn't about Netflix or content or anniversaries. This was about history repeating itself, but with higher stakes, bigger platforms, and a version of Diana that could finally be fully unlocked. Diaries, home videos, private moments never meant for public eyes. The real Diana, the one he spent 30 years protecting. And that is where everything accelerates, because once that door was shut, the full weight of what had been asked finally became visible in a way it hadn't before. Like stepping back back from a painting and suddenly seeing the entire image instead of just scattered brushstrokes. The proposal wasn't just ambitious, it was invasive in a way that cut straight to the core of everything Charles Spencer had spent 3 decades protecting. Because this wasn't about using public footage or retelling familiar stories, this was about access to Althorp itself, the private ground, the lake, the island where Diana was laid to rest specifically to escape the reach of cameras, and then even further, deeper into the sealed archive, the handwritten diaries, the home movies, the private fragments of a life that had never been offered to the world, not once, not even for a second. And layered on top of all of that was the most explosive idea of all, the attempt to draw a direct line between Diana and Meghan Markle, not loosely, not symbolically, but explicitly, positioning Meghan Markle as the continuation of Diana's story, the modern version of the same fight, the same resistance, the same emotional arc. And when you stack that on top of everything that had already happened, the jewelry appearances, the Oprah interview, the carefully constructed parallels, it stops feeling accidental and starts feeling like a blueprint that had been unfolding piece by piece. And from Charles Spencer's perspective, that blueprint must have looked unmistakable, because by the time that proposal arrived, the pattern had already been established, the visual language already built, the emotional comparisons already seeded into public consciousness, and now the final step was being requested: the original material, the authentic core, the pieces that would transform a narrative into something definitive, something impossible to challenge. And that is exactly where the line was drawn, because once those private elements are released, they can never be contained again. They become permanent, consumed, interpreted, repackaged endlessly, and the Diana that survived untouched for decades would finally be absorbed into the same cycle that had already consumed everything else around her. And the response was immediate, complete, and absolute. No access, no negotiation, no compromise, just a closed door that echoed louder than any speech, because Charles Spencer understood something that everyone else seemed willing to ignore, that the moment those diaries or those home videos leave Althorp, the final boundary disappears, and Diana ceases to exist as a private person anywhere in the world, even in death, even in memory, and that is a threshold he has refused to cross for 30 years, no matter who asked or how much was offered. What makes that refusal even more explosive is what it exposes about the balance of power inside this entire situation. Because while Prince William may feel strongly about how Diana's image is used, Prince William cannot act openly without creating an institutional crisis. Every move Prince William makes is interpreted as the monarchy defending itself, reinforcing the exact narrative Diana once fought against. But Charles Spencer exists outside that system. He carries the same blood connection without the same restrictions, and that means when Charles Spencer refuses, it doesn't read as strategy or control. It reads as something far more difficult to challenge. It reads as personal, as protective, as final. And that is why the reaction was so intense, because this wasn't just a deal falling apart. It was being interpreted as a verdict on everything that led up to it, a quiet judgment delivered without a single public accusation, and the fact that it came from the one person who had consistently refused every opportunity to speak made it impossible to dismiss or spin into something else, because silence had always been Charles Spencer's language, and this was the loudest sentence he had ever formed. At the same time, the timing of this entire situation reveals something equally unsettling about where things stood on the other side, because the broader media projects had already begun to lose momentum. The initial success built on proximity to the royal story had started to fade, and what remained clear through every response, every review, every reaction was that the strongest connection the audience continued to engage with was Diana herself, her story, her tragedy, her emotional weight, and that reality turns the proposal into something far more strategic than sentimental, because it suggests that access to Diana's untouched legacy was no longer just meaningful, it was necessary. And that is where the tension becomes impossible to resolve, because on one side there is Charles Spencer carrying decades of silence, regret, and protection, guarding a version of Diana that the world has never seen, believing that keeping it hidden is the only way to truly preserve it. And on the other side there is Prince Harry, whose connection to Diana is not archival but lived, not curated but deeply personal, a son who experienced her life and her loss in a way no archive can ever replicate. And those two positions collide at a point where neither can fully invalidate the other, because what Charles Spencer protects is memory, but what Prince Harry carries is experience. And the moment those two claims intersect, the question stops being simple and starts becoming something far more complicated, something that cannot be resolved through contracts or proposals or even refusals, because it lives in the space between ownership and emotion, between legacy and identity, between what should be preserved and what demands to be told. told. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the larger machinery continues to move. The industry that sees stories as assets, grief as content, and legacy as something that can be scheduled, packaged, and released, and that is the quiet force sitting behind everything. The one element that turns deeply personal decisions into global spectacles. The one element that keeps pushing for more access, more revelation, more exposure. Because the appetite never really fades, it only shifts direction. So what remains now is not a resolution, but a standoff that feels far from over. A locked archive on one side, a story still trying to evolve on the other, and a silence that has already said more than words ever could, because the refusal didn't just stop a project, it exposed the fault line running through everything. And once you see that line, it becomes impossible to unsee, leaving one final question hanging in the air, not answered, not resolved, just waiting. How long can something this powerful stay locked away before the pressure to open it becomes impossible to ignore?